the sizzle of steak wasn't what made my skin prickle. It was my mother's voice cutting through the backyard chatter with deliberate precision. "Hey, Sarah," she called out, eyes glinting with the satisfaction of a predator who knows their prey is cornered. "When are you going to stop being so worthless and get a real job? This family needs contributors, not deadweight." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Every conversation around us stuttered to a halt, my throat constricting, as I felt dozens of eyes shift in my direction. Neighbors, family, friends, cousins, all suddenly witnesses to my humiliation. The potato salad bowl one was carrying grew impossibly heavy in my hands. What made it unbearable wasn't just the cruel assessment of my worth. It was the laughter that followed. My father's deep chuckle. My brother Derek's smug snort as he popped open another beer. And worst of all, my mother's satisfied smirk as she adjusted her designer sunglasses, manicured hand waving dismissively in my direction. They had no idea who I really was, or what I was capable of. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 29 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been working as an undercover FBI agent, investigating a massive money laundering operation. The catch? My own parents are at the center of it all. This is the story of how I infiltrated my family's criminal enterprise while they thought I was just their disappointing daughter. "You've been criticizing my every move for years," I said, my voice steadier than the trembling in my fingertips would suggest. "Nothing I do is ever good enough." My mother's face twisted into that exaggerated mock surprise I'd seen 1,000 times. "Because you never do anything worth praising." She gestured broadly to the neighbors who were pretending not to listen. "Everyone here has children they're proud of. Doctors, lawyers, business owners. And what are you? Bouncing between temp jobs, living at home, barely contributing." My father nodded in solemn agreement, as if her assessment was simply an unfortunate truth that needed to be stated. Derek snorted. "Even I'm embarrassed to bring friends over because they'll meet you." The air felt electric, charged with something more dangerous than embarrassment. The neighbors' eyes darted between us like spectators at a tennis match, waiting for me to break, to cry, to retreat like I always had before. The scent of charred meat mingled with something sour, the taste of a decision crystallizing in my mouth. I stepped closer to my mother, close enough to see the pores beneath her expensive foundation, the tiny lines around her eyes that her Botox appointments couldn't quite erase. "Fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but somehow filling the sudden silence. "If I'm such a disappointment, maybe it's time I showed you exactly what I'm capable of." She laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "And what's that? Another failed art project? Another business idea that goes nowhere?" What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for 3 years, I'd been gathering evidence, recording conversations, photographing documents, and building a case that would bring down their entire operation. The FBI badge hidden in my apartment felt like it was burning a hole through the city, calling to me from miles away. The rest of the barbecue blurred into a haze of forced smiles and whispered commentary. I moved through it like a ghost, my mind already racing ahead, laying out the steps of what would come next. If they wanted to see what I was truly capable of, I wouldn't just show them. I'd destroy the empire they'd built on other people's misery. By the time the last guest left, trailing awkward goodbyes in their wake, my decision was made. I wouldn't drag this out with arguments or tears. I'd initiate the final phase of the operation, and by this time tomorrow, their world would be upended forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn hadn't yet broken when I sent the coded message to my handler, the encryption software on my hidden phone ensuring the transmission couldn't be traced. My hands weren't shaking from grief, but from a strange electric anticipation. The mansion I'd grown up in sat silent around me, unaware it was about to become the site of one of the biggest financial crime busts in the state's history. The Mitchell family name had always commanded respect in our affluent community. My father, Richard Mitchell, ran an investment firm that had grown exponentially over the past decade. My mother, Eleanor, managed their numerous charitable foundations, while my brother Derek was being groomed to take over the family business. On paper, they were the perfect American success story. In reality, they were washing money for 3 different criminal organizations. I moved silently through the halls, carefully placing the final listening devices in locations they'd never think to check. The irony wasn't lost on me that their dismissal of my intelligence had created the perfect cover. They spoke freely around me, never considering that the worthless daughter was cataloging their every indiscretion. My journey to this moment had begun 3 years ago. Fresh out of Quantico, I'd been approached about a delicate assignment. Financial crimes had been tracking unusual patterns through my family's business for months, but they couldn't get close enough to gather conclusive evidence. They needed someone on the inside, someone the family would never suspect. When they first proposed the idea, I'd laughed bitterly. My family thinks I'm a complete failure. They've told me that my entire life. The senior agent had simply nodded. Exactly, that's why this could work. Your estrangement creates the perfect opportunity for reconciliation and infiltration. I'd moved back home under the guise of needing to find myself after a series of supposedly failed career attempts. My parents had welcomed me back with thinly veiled disappointment, making it clear that this was temporary, that I needed to get my act together. Little did they know that every dismissive comment, every belittling remark, only strengthened my resolve. By noon, everything was in place. I checked my watch, knowing that across town, teams of agents were preparing to move in. The evidence was irrefutable. Offshore accounts, shell companies, falsified donation records, and meetings with known criminals, all meticulously documented by the daughter they couldn't be bothered to take seriously. I made my way to the kitchen, where my mother was arranging flowers in an expensive crystal vase. She barely glanced up as I entered. If you're looking for breakfast, you're too late. You really should try getting up before noon someday. I poured myself a cup of coffee, feeling strangely calm. Actually, I'm right on time. The doorbell rang before she could question what I meant. From my position in the kitchen, I could see my father crossing the foyer to answer it. The confused expression on his face as he opened the door to find a team of FBI agents, warrant in hand, would stay with me forever. Richard Mitchell? The lead agent asked, though it wasn't really a question. FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with money laundering, tax evasion, and racketeering charges. My father's face drained of color. There must be some mistake. I'm a respected businessman. The agent cut him off by handing him the warrant. No mistake, sir. Please gather your family in the living room while we conduct our search. My mother had frozen by the vase, flowers forgotten as agents began streaming into our home. Richard? Her voice held a note of panic I'd never heard before. What's happening? Derek thundered down the stairs, still in his pajamas. What the hell? Dad, who are these people? He stopped short when he saw the FBI jackets. This is some kind of joke, right? No one was laughing now. As they were herded into the living room, their eyes fell on me, still calmly sipping my coffee. Sarah, my father hissed, call our lawyer. Now! I set my cup down slowly, deliberately. I don't think that will help, Dad. Not with the evidence they have. Confusion crossed his face, followed quickly by suspicion. What do you know about this? Before I could answer, the lead agent entered the room. Ms. Mitchell, everything is proceeding as planned. Is there anything else we should know before we continue? 3 pairs of eyes widened in shock as I straightened my posture and addressed him professionally. The safe behind the painting in the study has additional documents. The combination is my brother's birthday. The agent nodded and left to relay the information. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother broke it first, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah? What is this? I met her gaze evenly. This, mother, is what your worthless daughter has been working on for the past 3 years. I reached into my pocket and withdrew my FBI badge, placing it on the coffee table between us. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, Financial Crimes Division. You're all under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, and a host of other charges we'll be detailing at the station. My father lunged forward, his face contorted with rage, but was immediately restrained by two agents who had been standing quietly by the door. "You ungrateful little," he spat, struggling against their hold. "We gave you everything." "No," I corrected him calmly. "You gave me nothing but contempt and criticism. What I am today, I built myself, despite you, not because of you." My mother had gone completely still, her perfectly maintained facade crumbling as the reality of the situation sank in. "This can't be happening," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Not to us. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? To our standing in the community?" Even now, in the midst of their world collapsing, her concern was for appearances. Derek was the last to find his voice. "You've been spying on us? Your own family? How could you betray us like this?" The genuine hurt in his voice almost made me falter. Almost. How could you participate in crimes that hurt countless innocent people? How could you look down on me while building your success on fraud and deception? Outside, more vehicles were arriving. Through the window, I could see news vans setting up across the street. The Mitchell family scandal would be breaking news by evening. "You always wanted me to make something of myself," I said, watching as agents began boxing up computers and files. "To make you proud. Well, this is me doing exactly that." My father, now handcuffed, looked at me with pure hatred. "You're no daughter of mine." I smiled, feeling nothing but a strange sense of completion. "That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years." As they were led away, my mother paused beside me. "Why, Sarah? We're your family." For the first time in my life, I saw genuine emotion in her eyes. Fear, betrayal, and perhaps a flicker of regret. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me. Family doesn't build their happiness on others. Misery. You taught me what family isn't." The FBI showed me what it could be. The mansion fell quiet as they were escorted to separate vehicles. My supervisor approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did good work, Mitchell. I know how difficult this must have been." I nodded, feeling the weight of the past 3 years finally lifting. "Actually, sir, it was easier than you might think. They never saw me, not really. That was their biggest mistake." As I walked down the driveway of the home I'd grown up in, I knew I would never return. The neighbors watched from behind curtains and over fences. The same people who had witnessed my humiliation just yesterday now bearing witness to my vindication. I didn't acknowledge them. They, like my family, had never been worth my time. The evidence we'd gathered would ensure that the Mitchell family's reign was over. The businesses would be dismantled, the assets frozen, and the partners and associates who had participated in the scheme would face their own reckonings. My parents and brother would spend years, possibly decades, behind bars. As for me, the worthless daughter who brought down a criminal enterprise from the inside, I had a new assignment waiting. My cover was blown, but my career was just beginning. The FBI had already offered me a position in their elite undercover division, recognizing that anyone who could fool their own family for 3 years had extraordinary talent. That evening, as I sat in my small apartment, my real home, watching the news coverage of the Mitchell family arrest, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a quiet sense of justice served. The reporters described me as a brave whistleblower and dedicated agent, words my family had never thought to associate with me. My phone rang. My real phone, not the one I'd used for the operation. It was my handler. "Turn to Channel 7, he said without preamble. I switched channels to find my mother being led into the courthouse for her initial appearance. Her designer outfit had been replaced with a plain blouse and slacks, her perfectly styled hair now falling limply around her face. As she passed the reporters, one shouted, "Mrs. Mitchell, how does it feel to know your own daughter brought you down?" She stopped, turning to face the cameras. For a moment, I thought she might curse my name or proclaim her innocence. Instead, she said something that stunned me. "My daughter," she said, her voice catching, "is clearly not the person I thought she was. She's stronger than I ever gave her credit for." Then she was ushered inside, leaving me staring at the screen in disbelief. My handler cleared his throat. Thought you'd want to see that. Doesn't change anything, but… Thank you, I said quietly, turning off the television. It didn't change anything, not really. The damage had been done long ago, and no last-minute recognition could erase years of emotional abuse. But as I sat in the darkness of my apartment, I realized something important. My worth had never been determined by their assessment. I had always been valuable, capable, and strong. Their inability to see it was their failure, not mine. The next morning, I walked into FBI headquarters with my head held high. Agents I'd never met nodded in recognition as I passed. My supervisor was waiting in the conference room with the rest of the team. "Mitchell," he said with a rare smile. "Ready to see what you helped accomplish?" On the table before him lay files detailing the full extent of the Mitchell family operation and the larger network we'd exposed. Hundreds of millions in laundered money, dozens of conspirators, and connections to criminal organizations across 3 countries. It had been one of the most successful undercover operations in the department's history. You know, one of the senior agents said, studying me with newfound respect, "Most people couldn't do what you did. Investigating your own family requires a special kind of strength." I thought about that as I flipped through the evidence of my family's crimes. She was right. It had required strength, but not the kind they imagined. It wasn't the strength to betray my family that had carried me through. It was the strength to finally acknowledge that they had betrayed me first. Every time they dismissed my worth, every time they made me feel small to make themselves feel big, that recognition had freed me to do what was right, regardless of blood ties. As the meeting concluded and assignments for the prosecution phase were distributed, my supervisor pulled me aside. "The director wants to see you." My stomach tightened. Even after everything, praise from authority figures made me nervous, a lingering effect of my upbringing. The director was waiting in his office, a folder open on his desk. He gestured for me to sit. "Agent Mitchell, your work on the family operation has been exemplary. Not just the technical aspects, but the psychological fortitude required." He closed the folder. "We're recommending you for a commendation." I shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I was just doing my job." He smiled slightly. "No, you weren't. You were doing something extraordinarily difficult that most agents would never be asked to do. You infiltrated your own life, and you did it with remarkable composure." As I left his office, commendation letter in hand, I realized something profound. My family had spent my entire life telling me I was worthless, but they had never actually seen my worth. They had been too blinded by their own greed and ambition to recognize the person I had become. In the end, it wasn't their recognition I had needed. It was my own. And standing in the halls of the FBI headquarters, surrounded by colleagues who respected me not for my family name but for my own achievements, I finally felt it completely, my own undeniable worth. The days following the Mitchell family arrests unfolded in a whirlwind of depositions, evidence processing, and media frenzy. I found myself at the center of a storm I had meticulously engineered, yet nothing could have prepared me for the emotional aftermath. Each morning, I woke to new headlines splashed across every news outlet. FBI daughter brings down family empire. Mitchell heiress, undercover hero. The black sheep who wore a badge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As I entered the federal building for another day of testimony, reporters clustered at the entrance called out questions that echoed off the marble walls. "Agent Mitchell, did you ever feel guilty? Were there moments you wanted to abandon the investigation? Do you consider yourself a traitor to your family?" I kept my head high, focusing on the security checkpoint ahead, letting their questions dissolve into white noise. Inside, the quiet of the conference room was a welcome reprieve. My supervisor, Special Agent Daniels, was already there, reviewing documents with our legal team. He looked up as I entered, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. "How are you holding up, Mitchell?" It was the same question he'd asked every day since the arrests, and I gave him the same answer. "I'm fine, sir." The words felt mechanical, practiced, but what else could I say? That I woke in the middle of the night dreaming of my mother's face as they led her away? That sometimes, in quiet moments, I heard my father's voice calling me a traitor? That beneath my professional exterior, I was grappling with emotions I couldn't even name? None of that belonged in this room. Daniel studied me for a moment longer than usual. The U.S. attorney wants to go through your testimony again. Some of the defense attorneys are trying to suggest you manipulated evidence due to personal resentment. His eyes never left mine. Did you? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I met his gaze steadily. Every piece of evidence was collected according to protocol. Every recording was made with proper authorization. My personal feelings about my family had no bearing on my professional conduct. The words were firm, without defensiveness. They were the truth. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good, because they're going to come at you hard in court. They'll try to paint you as a resentful daughter seeking revenge, not a dedicated agent seeking justice. You need to be prepared for that. I understood the warning. In many ways, the hardest part of my job was still ahead. The first visitation request came 3 weeks after the arrests. My mother wanted to see me. I stared at the form for a long time, the prison letterhead stark and official. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue compartmentalizing as I had during the investigation. Another part, a part I'd tried to silence for 3 years, wanted answers to questions I'd never dared to ask. After 2 days of deliberation, I found myself in a sterile visitation room, watching as guards escorted my mother in. Gone was the designer wardrobe, the perfectly coiffed hair, the manicured nails. She wore a standard-issue jumpsuit, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without her usual armor of wealth and status, she looked smaller, older, more human. She sat across from me, her hands folded on the table between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. What do you say to the mother you've helped put behind bars? What does she say to the daughter who put her there? Finally, she broke the silence. You look well, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. The papers say you're being commended. It wasn't what I'd expected her to say. I'd prepared for anger, accusations, even threats, not this strange, tentative attempt at normal conversation. I'm doing my job, I replied, careful to keep my tone neutral. The job you've apparently been doing for 3 years. A hint of the old bitterness crept into her voice. Living in our home, eating at our table, all while plotting to destroy us. There it was, the reproach I'd been waiting for. I was investigating serious crimes, Mother. Crimes that hurt real people. Did you ever think about that? The lives ruined by the money you helped launder? She flinched slightly at the directness of my question. We never hurt anyone directly, she said, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. It was just money moving from one place to another. Everyone does it at that level. I leaned forward, unable to hide my incredulity. Is that how you justified it? Everyone does it? The money you moved funded drug operations, human trafficking, illegal arms deals. People died because of those operations. My voice remained low, but the intensity must have been palpable. She looked away, her jaw tightening. Your father handled those aspects. I've focused on the foundations, the legitimate side of things. The classic deflection. I'd heard variations of it from countless suspects over the years. And you never questioned where the money came from? You never wondered why your husband's investment firm outperformed every competitor by impossible margins. Her eyes snapped back to mine, a flash of the formidable woman I'd grown up fearing. Don't pretend you're doing this out of some moral high ground, Sarah. You did this because you resented us. Because you wanted to prove something. I felt my professional facade slipping, emotions I'd bottled up threatening to spill over. I did this because it was right, I said, my voice unsteady despite my best efforts. But yes, there's something particularly satisfying about bringing justice to people who spent my entire life telling me I was worthless. The words hung between us, raw and honest. To my surprise, she didn't immediately fire back. Instead, she seemed to deflate slightly, her shoulders sagging under the weight of a realization. We pushed you too hard, she said after a long pause. Your father and I. We wanted you to be exceptional. When you didn't follow the path we'd envisioned, we reacted poorly. Reacted poorly? I echoed, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. You systematically destroyed my self-confidence. You compared me to everyone else's children. You made me feel like I was fundamentally flawed because I didn't want what you wanted for me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She looked down at her hands, now bare of the expensive rings she'd always worn. We thought we were motivating you. Her voice was quiet, almost contemplative. We thought if we pushed hard enough, you'd eventually become what we wanted you to be. And what was that exactly? Another cog in your criminal enterprise? The bitterness I'd tried to contain seeped into my words. She shook her head slowly. No. Someone who would carry on our legacy. Someone extraordinary. She looked up, meeting my eyes with unexpected directness. And I suppose, in a way, that's exactly what you became. Just not how we imagined. The observation caught me off guard. Was there a twisted compliment buried in her words? A recognition, however belated, of my capabilities? Before I could respond, she continued. Your father won't ever forgive you. You should know that. Her tone wasn't threatening, merely matter of fact. He sees this as the ultimate betrayal. Derek, too. They're both struggling with what you've done. I absorbed this information without surprise. I'd never expected forgiveness, never factored it into my decisions. And you? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Can you forgive me? She studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right word, Sarah. What you did was professionally admirable, personally devastating. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I don't know if there's a way forward from here. I just wanted to see you, to understand if possible. Understand what? I asked, genuinely curious now. She hesitated, vulnerability flickering across her features, an expression I'd rarely witnessed in my formidable mother. If it was all an act, if every moment of the last 3 years was fabricated. The question struck deeper than I'd anticipated. I considered deflecting, maintaining the emotional distance that had protected me throughout the investigation. Instead, I chose honesty. Not everything, I admitted quietly. There were moments, dinners, holidays, conversations, when I almost forgot why I was there. When it felt real. The admission cost me something, a small breach in the wall I'd built between Agent Mitchell and daughter Sarah. She nodded slowly as if my answer confirmed something she'd suspected. I thought so. There were times when I saw glimpses of the daughter I remembered, before. She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Before you decided I wasn't good enough? I supplied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She winced slightly, acknowledging the truth in my words. We made mistakes, Sarah. Terrible ones, both in business and as parents. The admission hung in the air between us, unexpected and insufficient. But not everything was a lie. We did love you in our way. Your way was cruel, I said simply. It left scars that I still carry. She didn't deny it, which was something. Perhaps the only honest thing she could offer me now. As the guard signaled that our time was almost up, she asked one final question. Was it worth it? Giving up your family to do what you thought was right? The question was pointed, but not accusatory. Almost philosophical. I considered it carefully before answering. I didn't give up my family, Mother. I gave up the illusion of one. There's a difference. I stood as the guard approached. What I gained was self-respect, purpose, and colleagues who value me for who I actually am, not who they demand I become. She remained seated, looking suddenly older than her years. I hope that's enough, in the end. As the guard escorted her away, I wondered if she was right to question it. Would professional accolades and moral certainty fill the space where family should have been? The prosecution moved swiftly, bolstered by the mountain of evidence I'd helped collect. My testimony lasted 3 grueling days, during which defense attorneys attempted to undermine my credibility by painting me as emotionally unstable, resentful, and vindictive. They dredged up childhood reports of defiant behavior, teenage therapy sessions, even college relationships that had ended poorly, anything to suggest I was motivated by revenge rather than justice. Through it all, I maintained my composure, answering each accusation with factual, measured responses. I didn't deny my complicated feelings toward my family that would have been transparently false. Instead, I acknowledged them while demonstrating how my professional training and FBI protocols had ensured the integrity of the evidence. On the final day of my testimony, my father was present in the courtroom. I hadn't seen him since the day of the arrests, and the sight of him in prisoner's attire was jarring. He stared at me throughout my testimony, his gaze cold and unflinching. I forced myself to meet his eyes as I detailed the financial crimes I'd witnessed him orchestrating. "Agent Mitchell," the defense attorney asked, circling like a shark that had scented blood, "would you say you had a good relationship with your father growing up?" "Objection," the prosecutor interjected. "Relevance?" The judge considered briefly before responding. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, counselor. This isn't family court." The defense attorney nodded in smug satisfaction. I cleared my throat, aware that my answer could influence how the jury perceived my testimony. My relationship with my father was complicated. He had high expectations that I often felt I couldn't meet. "Would you say you resented him for these high expectations?" The attorney pressed, obviously hoping to establish bias. I took a moment before answering, choosing my words carefully. I resented being made to feel worthless when I chose a different path than the one he had planned for me. But my personal feelings didn't influence the collection of evidence or the execution of my duties as an FBI agent. "So you expect this court to believe that you lived undercover in your family home for 3 years, gathering evidence against your own parents, without any personal animosity influencing your actions?" His tone dripped with skepticism. I leaned slightly forward, making sure my voice would carry clearly to the jury. "What I expect this court to understand is that professional integrity can coexist with personal difficulty. Yes, I had complicated feelings about my family. No, those feelings didn't lead me to falsify or manipulate evidence. The financial records, recorded conversations, and documented meetings speak for themselves. They're not emotional, they're factual." In the gallery, I noticed several jurors nodding slightly. The defense attorney, sensing he was losing ground, pivoted to a different line of questioning. As the day concluded, my father was led past me on his way out of the courtroom. For a brief moment, our eyes met. "You were always like this," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "Always thinking you knew better than everyone else." It wasn't the angry outburst I'd braced for, but something more resigned, almost philosophical, as if he was finally seeing a truth that had been there all along. "I knew right from wrong," I replied, matching his volume. That was enough. He held my gaze for a moment longer before the guards led him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions about the day's proceedings, but I moved past them without comment. My supervisor was waiting by a government vehicle, his expression unreadable. "Good job in there," he said as I approached. "The U.S. Attorney thinks your testimony was compelling." "Thank you, sir." I slid into the passenger seat, suddenly exhausted. As he pulled into traffic, Daniels glanced sideways at me. "You know, when we first proposed this assignment to you, I had doubts," he admitted. "Undercover work is difficult enough without the personal complications you were facing. I wondered if you'd be able to maintain objectivity." I looked out the window, watching the city blur past. So did I at times. The confession was easier now that the testimony was behind me. There were moments when I questioned whether I was doing this for the right reasons. "And what did you conclude?" His question seemed genuinely curious rather than evaluative. I considered it carefully. That motivation is complex. Yes, part of me wanted vindication after years of being belittled and dismissed. But a larger part wanted to stop criminals who happened to be my family from continuing to hurt others through their actions. I turned to face him. Does that make me a bad agent? Quote. He shook his head decisively. It makes you human, Mitchell. We all bring our personal histories to this job. The key is recognizing how they influence us without letting them compromise our work. He paused at a red light. For what it's worth, I think you managed that balance better than most would have. As we pulled up to my apartment building, he added, Take a few days off. The hard part's over. But even as I thanked him and exited the vehicle, I wondered if that was true. The investigation and testimony were complete, but the process of reconciling who my family was with who I had become was just beginning. Inside my apartment, I found a letter waiting, official FBI stationery with the director's seal. As I read its contents, a complex wave of emotions washed over me. I was being offered a promotion and transfer to the elite Undercover Operations Division in Washington, D.C. My work on the Mitchell case had impressed the highest levels of leadership, demonstrating exceptional psychological resilience and commitment to justice. I should have felt triumphant. This was the validation I'd worked for, concrete proof of my worth that no one, not even my father, could diminish. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness, as if reaching the summit of a mountain only to find the view obscured by fog. That night, I dreamed of our family home, not as it had been during my undercover years, tense and performative, but as it had been in rare, fleeting moments of my childhood. Holiday mornings when criticism was temporarily suspended. Summer evenings when my father taught me to play chess, his approval warming me when I made clever moves. My mother's rare, genuine smile when I showed her a drawing I'd made. I woke with tears on my cheeks, mourning not the family that had been arrested, but the family that might have been if greed and ambition hadn't corrupted whatever love had once existed between us. It was a grief I hadn't allowed myself to feel during the investigation, a recognition of loss that transcended professional accomplishment. The verdict came down 3 weeks later, guilty on all counts. Sentencing would follow, but the minimum mandatory sentences meant my parents would likely spend the remainder of their lives in prison. Derek, who had played a smaller role in the operation, might serve 15 to 20 years with good behavior. I wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. I'd already accepted the Washington position and was in the process of packing my apartment, preparing for a new chapter far from the shadows of my family's crimes. My supervisor called with the news. Justice was served today, Mitchell, he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. You should be proud of what you accomplished. I thanked him automatically, the expected response from a dedicated agent. But after hanging up, I sat among my half-packed boxes, wondering what justice really meant when it tore through the fabric of your own history, leaving you both victor and casualty in the same breath. Washington, D.C. welcomed me with anonymous efficiency. 6 months after the conviction of the Mitchell family, I found myself establishing a new life in a city that knew nothing of my past. My apartment in Georgetown was deliberately different from any place I'd lived before. Exposed brick walls, industrial fixtures, and furniture I'd selected purely for comfort rather than appearance. There was nothing here that echoed the Mitchell family aesthetic of calculated luxury. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My new position at FBI headquarters placed me in the heart of the Undercover Operations Division, training and mentoring agents, preparing for deep cover assignments. My experience had become a case study in psychological resilience during family infiltrations, a specialized niche I'd never intended to create for myself. The Mitchell methodology, they called it in training sessions, a term that made me wince internally, even as I maintained a professional demeanor. My history had been distilled into bullet points and protocols, clinical lessons extracted from the most personal investigation of my career. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood before a class of 20 recruits, their faces eager and attentive as I outlined the psychological challenges of maintaining cover during long-term operations. Compartmentalization is essential, I explained, pacing slowly at the front of the room. But equally important is recognizing when that compartmentalization begins to fail. When the lines between your cover identity and your true self start to blur. A hand rose. A young woman with intelligent eyes and a serious expression. Agent Mitchell, how did you handle moments of doubt during your family operation? Were there times when you questioned whether you could go through with it? The question hung in the air, deceptively simple, yet cutting to the core of what made my case unique. I could have given the standard answer, the one in the training manual about mission focus and the greater good. Instead, I chose honesty. Every day, I admitted, watching surprise register on their faces. I questioned my motives, my methods, even my own perception of events. When you're investigating people you've known your entire life, objectivity becomes complicated. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. What carried me through wasn't certainty. It was commitment to truth, even when that truth was painful. After class, the young woman approached me. "Thank you for your candor," she said quietly. "Most instructors make undercover work sound like a chess game, strategic, detached, impersonal. You're the first to acknowledge the human cost." I studied her, recognizing something of myself in her directness. "What's your name?" I asked. "Agent Keisha Williams," she replied. "I've been assigned to a community infiltration case, a church group suspected of laundering money for domestic extremists." She hesitated before continuing. "My grandmother attends this church. She doesn't know about the investigation." Understanding dawned immediately. "And you're concerned about how this will affect her, about betraying her trust." Williams nodded, relief evident in her expression, relief at being understood without judgment. "Walk with me," I suggested, gathering my materials. As we moved through the corridors of headquarters, I shared something I'd never included in my official reports or testimony. During my operation, there was a moment, my father's birthday dinner. He made a speech about family loyalty, about how proud he was that we all stood together against a world that wanted to tear us down. Williams listened intently as I continued. In that moment, I almost broke cover. Not because I believed him, but because I glimpsed what our family might have been without the corruption, the criminal enterprise, what I might have had if things had been different. "What did you do?" she asked as we paused by a window overlooking the city. I turned to face her directly. I reminded myself that the truth matters more than comfortable illusions. That real love, for family, community, country, sometimes requires us to shatter false versions of those things. I touched her shoulder briefly. "Your grandmother deserves to know what her church is really doing, even if that knowledge comes painfully. And you deserve to be the agent who brings that truth to light, precisely because you care enough to worry about the consequences." Something shifted in Williams' expression, a new resolve replacing uncertainty. "Thank you, Agent Mitchell." As she walked away, I realized I'd just given her something no one had offered me during my own investigation: understanding without diminishment, acknowledgement of complexity without questioning commitment. That evening, I returned to my apartment to find an official envelope waiting, quarterly reports on the Mitchell case. As a courtesy, the Bureau kept me informed of developments, though I'd never requested this arrangement. For a moment, I considered leaving it unopened. My new life was taking shape, and dwelling on the past seemed counterproductive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Curiosity won out. Inside was the standard update on appeals, all denied, asset forfeitures, proceeding, and institutional assignments, unchanged. But paperclipped to the back was something unexpected. A handwritten letter from my mother, forwarded from the prison system after appropriate security screening. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it, surprised by my own reaction. 6 months of distance hadn't diminished the power she still held over my emotional state, a realization that both frustrated and fascinated me as an undercover specialist. "Sarah," the letter began, her elegant script unchanged despite her circumstances. "I've had time to reflect, more time than I've ever had in my life. Prison offers few distractions from one's thoughts, which is perhaps its cruelest and most valuable aspect." Quote, I settled into my armchair, steeling myself for manipulations or recriminations. Instead, what followed was something I'd never received from Eleanor Mitchell, reflection that bordered on accountability. "I've been thinking about worth, how we measure it, how we assign it to others. Your father and I believed worth was determined by achievement, status, financial success. We raised you and Derek with that singular metric, punishing deviation and rewarding compliance." Her words continued across 3 pages, detailing how this warped value system had led not just to criminal behavior, but to the systematic devaluation of a daughter who refused to embrace their corrupt priorities. We called you worthless because you rejected what we valued. We never considered that perhaps our values themselves were worthless. The letter concluded without asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, merely an acknowledgement that she was beginning to understand the damage they had caused, both to society through their crimes and to me through their parenting. You were never worthless, Sarah. We simply lacked the wisdom to see your true value. I sat with the letter for a long time, emotions cycling through me like weather systems. Anger, vindication, grief, and something else I couldn't immediately name. It wasn't closure, exactly, that neat psychological bow we're taught to expect after confronting past traumas. It was messier, more ambiguous, but somehow more authentic. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I requested a personal day and drove to the Women's Federal Correctional Facility where my mother was serving her sentence. The 3-hour drive gave me ample time to question my judgment, to rehearse what I might say, to consider turning around at least a dozen times. Yet I continued, drawn by something stronger than logic, a need not for reconciliation but for completion, for looking my past directly in the eyes one final time before fully embracing my future. The visitation room was much like the one where we'd last met, institutional and sterile. When my mother entered, I was struck again by how diminished she appeared without her armor of wealth and status. Her prison uniform hung loosely on her frame, and her hair, now streaked with more gray than before, was pulled back simply. "Sarah," she said, genuine surprise in her voice as she took the seat across from me. "I didn't expect you to come." I nodded, acknowledging the unlikelihood of my presence. "Neither did I admitted, "but I received your letter." She clasped her hands on the table between us, nodding slightly. "I meant what I wrote," she said quietly, "though I don't expect it changes anything." I studied her, using all my training to read beyond her words, to detect manipulation or deceit. I found neither, only a weariness that seemed bone-deep and, perhaps for the first time, authentic. "It doesn't change the past," I agreed, "or the consequences of your actions, but it does." I paused, searching for the right words. "It matters that you've begun to see me as I am, not as you wanted me to be." She nodded, something like relief crossing her features. "I have a lot of time to think now, about mistakes made, opportunities missed." Her gaze met mine directly. "Derek refuses to see me. Did you know that? He blames me for not protecting him from your father's influence, for encouraging his involvement in the business." I hadn't known, but it didn't surprise me. Derek had always positioned himself as a victim of circumstance rather than an active participant in his own choices. "And Dad?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my reluctance to mention him. A shadow crossed her face. "Richard is unchanged. He maintains his innocence, claims persecution, refuses responsibility. The man I married has always been incapable of admitting fault." For the first time, I heard criticism in her assessment of my father, a separation of identity I'd never witnessed during their marriage. "Why are you different?" I asked, the question emerging before I could analyze its implications. "Why are you reflecting while he remains defiant?" She considered this thoughtfully, as if it were a question she'd been examining herself. "Perhaps because I've lost more," she said finally. Richard's identity was always bound up in his business, his public persona. Mine was tied to family, to being the perfect wife, mother, society fixture. "When you exposed us, you stripped away his success, but you also revealed that my family was—" She faltered, searching for words. "An illusion," I supplied quietly. She nodded, acceptance in the gesture. "Precisely. An elaborate performance we enacted for the community while hiding our true nature, from others and from ourselves." She leaned forward slightly. "In losing everything, I've been forced to see what was real and what wasn't. And very little was real, Sarah. The admission hung between us, weighted with decades of pretense suddenly acknowledged. Including your assessment of me," I said, "not as accusation but as confirmation." She nodded again. "Especially that you were the only authentic person in our family. And we punished you relentlessly for it." Tears glimmered in her eyes, but didn't fall. Eleanor Mitchell, even in her moment of reckoning, maintained her composure. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I would forgive, in your position. But I wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't, or wouldn't, see before." I felt something shift within me, a tight knot of resentment, not dissolving but perhaps loosening slightly. "I didn't come for an apology," I told her honestly. "I came because I needed to see you as you are now, not as the mother who haunts my memories. I needed to know if you were capable of change before I fully commit to my own." Confusion flickered across her face. "Your own changes? Your career seems to be thriving." I smiled slightly, realizing she still saw success primarily in professional terms. "I've been offered a significant promotion," I explained. "Director of a new joint task force focusing on family-based financial crimes. It would mean moving again, building a new team, creating protocols from the ground up." I hadn't told anyone else about the offer yet, making my mother the unlikely first confidant. "You'd be perfect for that role," she said without hesitation. "You understand the psychology of family complicity better than anyone could." There was no bitterness in her assessment, only a clear-eyed recognition of expertise born from painful experience. Taking it would mean fully embracing what happened, not just as something I survived, but as something that shaped my professional identity in ways I never anticipated. I hadn't articulated this concern aloud before, even to myself. I've been hesitant, worried that building a career on the foundation of our family's destruction might be unhealthy. My mother considered this seriously, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "Sarah, listen to me. What you did wasn't destruction, it was transformation. You took something corrupt and turned it into something meaningful, something that could help others." She leaned forward, intensity in her gaze. "That's not unhealthy. That's alchemy." The metaphor struck me with unexpected force. The ancient practice of transmuting base metals into gold, suddenly seeming apt for what I'd done with my painful history. I hadn't just survived my family's toxicity, I'd transformed it into specialized knowledge that could prevent others from suffering similar harms. "Maybe you're right," I said slowly. "Maybe the most authentic response to what happened isn't to bury it or overcome it, but to transform it into something valuable." "The most worthwhile thing I've ever done," my mother said with quiet certainty, "was raising a daughter strong enough to stop me when I lost my way. Don't diminish that achievement, mine or yours." As our visitation time ended, she stood, smoothing her uniform with hands that had once been adorned with diamonds. "Whatever you decide about the position, know this. You were never worthless, Sarah. You were the most valuable thing in our lives, and we were too blind to see it." The guard approached to escort her back, but she paused, meeting my eyes one final time. "Build something meaningful on the ashes of what we destroyed. That's not capitalizing on tragedy. It's the definition of redemption." I watched her walk away, straight-backed and dignified even in defeat. For the first time, I saw not just the mother who had wounded me, but a complex human being, capable of both terrible harm and genuine insight. It didn't erase the past, but it did something perhaps more important. It freed me to define my future without the constant shadow of her judgment. 1 week later, I accepted the task force position. My first official act was to establish a victim support program specifically for family members unwittingly connected to financial crimes. Spouses, children, and relatives who discovered their loved ones were not who they claimed to be. Who better to understand their unique trauma than someone who had lived it from both sides? My second act was to recruit Agent Williams, whose church investigation had successfully concluded. Her perspective as someone who understood community ties and family loyalty would be invaluable to our work. When I offered her the position, her response was immediate and affirming. "I've been hoping you'd ask," she said with a smile. "After all, who better to teach me about maintaining integrity while investigating loved ones?" I recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone who understood that the most difficult path could also be the most necessary one. The Mitchell Task Force, as it came to be known, despite my initial objections to the name, quickly established itself as a pioneering unit in the investigation of family-based financial crimes. Our approach balanced rigorous evidence gathering with psychological support for both agents and informants involved in these uniquely challenging cases. 1 year to the day after my mother's letter arrived, I stood at a podium before the FBI Academy's graduating class, invited to deliver the keynote address. As I looked out at the sea of eager faces, men and women preparing to dedicate their lives to justice, I set aside my prepared remarks and spoke from a place of hard-won wisdom. "You're entering a profession that will test not just your skills but your sense of self," I began. "You'll be asked to make difficult choices, to stand for truth when lies would be easier, to maintain your integrity when the path forward isn't clear." I paused, making eye contact with various graduates, seeing in them the same determination I'd once felt. There will be moments when doing what's right feels impossible, when personal connections, family loyalties, or your own doubts seem to outweigh your commitment to justice. In those moments, remember this: your worth isn't determined by others' assessment of you, but by your willingness to stand for what's true, even when that truth comes at great personal cost. The room was silent, hundreds of soon-to-be agents absorbing words born from experience rather than theory. I stand before you not just as an instructor or a case study, but as living proof that integrity, once tested in fire, emerges stronger. That value, once recognized internally rather than sought externally, becomes unshakable. As I concluded my speech to resounding applause, I caught sight of a familiar figure in the back of the hall, my supervisor from the Mitchell investigation, now Assistant Director Daniels. He nodded once, respect evident in the gesture, before slipping out a side door. Later at the reception, he found me by the refreshment table. "Impressive speech, Mitchell. Not what I expected, but better." I smiled, accepting the compliment with a nod. I decided they needed honesty more than inspiration. He considered this, sipping his coffee. "Sometimes they're the same thing," he observed. "Your team's results speak for themselves." 3 major family operations dismantled in the past year, with minimal collateral damage and unprecedented agent retention rates. His expression grew more serious. "The director's been talking about expanding your methodology across divisions." Pride flickered through me. Not the desperate need for validation I'd once felt, but genuine satisfaction in work well done. "We're just getting started," I replied. "Each case teaches us something new about the psychology of family complicity and how to address it effectively." "Speaking of family," Daniels said, his tone deliberately casual, "I heard your brother's sentence was reduced based on cooperation. He'll be eligible for release in 5 years. The news was unexpected, though not unwelcome. Derek had always been more follower than leader, more weak than malicious. Good for him, I said sincerely. Maybe he'll find his own path forward. Daniels studied me carefully. And you? Are you at peace with how things turned out? It was the kind of personal question he rarely asked, a departure from his usually professional demeanor. I considered honestly before answering. Peace isn't quite the right word. I've found purpose in what happened, meaning in the aftermath. I've built something valuable from painful experience. I met his gaze directly. That's better than peace. It's transformation. As he nodded in understanding, my phone buzzed with a text from Agent Williams. Target in custody. Evidence secured. Family members safely separated for questioning. Operation proceeding according to Mitchell protocol. Another successful intervention. Another family web of deception dismantled, while protecting those caught unknowingly in its threads. I excused myself from Daniels to respond, already mentally shifting into operational mode. This was my life now, using what I'd learned from being both the hunter and the hunted, both the deceiver and the deceived, to help others navigate similarly complicated waters. Walking through the academy grounds toward the parking area, I passed a memorial wall honoring agents who had made extraordinary sacrifices in the line of duty. My name would never appear there. My sacrifice had been of a different kind, less visible, but no less real. I had given up the illusion of family to find authentic purpose, traded comfortable lies for uncomfortable truth. In doing so, I had discovered something my parents never understood with all their wealth and status. True worth isn't assigned by others or measured in achievements. It's an internal quality, forged in the crucible of difficult choices and maintained through unwavering commitment to what matters most. The words of my academy instructor echoed back to me across the years. The best agents aren't those who never question themselves, but those who question everything except their core values. I had questioned everything, my family, my motives, my methods, but never wavered from my commitment to truth, however painful that truth might be. That evening, I returned to my office to find a package waiting, a commendation from the Attorney General for the Mitchell Task Force's groundbreaking work. As I placed it on my shelf alongside other accolades, I found myself thinking not of professional recognition, but of my mother's words during our last meeting. Build something meaningful on the ashes of what we destroyed. I had done exactly that, transforming personal trauma into professional expertise, family betrayal into institutional innovation. The Mitchell name, once synonymous with corruption, now represented a new standard in compassionate justice, an outcome neither my parents nor I could have imagined when this journey began. As I prepared to leave for the day, Agent Williams appeared in my doorway. "We've got another one," she said, her expression serious but determined. "Family-owned shipping company in Miami. Generations of respected business leaders, suspected of laundering cartel money through their legitimate operations." I nodded, already mentally preparing for the complexities ahead. "Children involved?" I asked, always my first concern in these cases. "2 daughters, college age," Williams confirmed. "They appear uninvolved but live at home during breaks. Access to sensitive areas of the business. Potential informants or potential subjects." I mused, "We'll need to determine which before proceeding." I gathered my coat, mind already racing with protocols and possibilities. "Assemble the team for briefing first thing tomorrow." "And Williams?" She paused at the door. "Yes, Director?" "Make sure we have psychological support standing by for the daughters from day one. No matter how this plays out, their world is about to change forever." She nodded in understanding, having witnessed firsthand the care we took with collateral victims of family crimes. As I locked my office for the night, I felt the familiar mix of determination and empathy that now defined my work, the balance I'd struggled to find during my own family investigation, but now maintained with practiced precision. This was my legacy, not the Mitchell name or fortune, but the Mitchell method, a pathway through one of law enforcement's most challenging terrains, illuminated by my own difficult journey. I had long since stopped asking whether I'd made the right choice in bringing down my family. The evidence was all around me, in the lives protected from financial predators, in the agents who learned to balance duty with compassion, in my own transformation from devalued daughter to respected leader. Some questions don't need answers. They need actions that render them irrelevant. Walking to my car under a sky brilliant with stars, I found myself smiling at the irony that had become my life's defining truth. Being called worthless had ultimately led me to discover my truest value, not just to myself but to countless others, who would never know my name but would benefit from my hard-won wisdom. Worth, I had learned, isn't assigned or achieved. It's realized through integrity, maintained through courage, and multiplied when shared with others walking similar paths. That was the lesson I carried forward, the foundation upon which I built each day, and the legacy that would outlast any family name or fortune. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.